Hello, welcome to my video on phonology. Hopefully you have already viewed my video on phonetics, as that video is a prerequisite to this video on phonology. Okay, let's begin with what is phonology? By doing this, I'm sort of going to contrast phonetics and phonology. How are they similar? How are they different? Well, phonetics and phonology both are the study of sounds. However, there's a slight difference in between the two. Phonetics studies the acoustic, auditory, and articulatory phonetics. So in other terms, phonetics sets out to it's a study of the individual sounds within a language. However, phonology sets out to investigate sound differences within a language and investigate sound patterns within a language. So rather than studying the individual sounds, isolated sounds, phonology studies how the sounds interact with each other once they're combined to form words, and those words form to combine once those words combine to form sentences. Okay, so it's how all those sounds interact with each other when they're used in real language. Throughout the video, I'm going to be using two different transcriptions. One is known as the phonemic or broad transcription, and with this transcription, I'm using slashes. This transcription is the least accurate, and it ignores the precise details that we discuss when we talk about phonology and how sounds change when they interact with each other and they're put together. So for example, when I use phonemic or broad transcription, I might ignore the English aspiration of voiceless stops, which you'll be introduced to later on. So there's very little use of diacritics. The other transcription I'll be using is phonetic or narrow transcription, and with this transcription I'll be using brackets. This is the most detailed of the two, and with this transcription I'll be using lots of diacritics to define those subtle sound changes that we see with phonemes and allophones. You heard me say phonemes and allophones. Well, let's define the two, as we'll be talking much about this throughout the video. Phonemes are contrastive. They're sound differences that are significant in terms of word meaning. So I'll give you more examples later on. But allophones are non-contrastive. They're just subtle sound differences in a language that are too small to really be perceived by a speaker or listener, but the sound differences do not affect the meaning of the word. Okay, so that's the main difference, I would say. Phonemes, two phonemes will affect the meaning of a word, whereas allophones are just subtle changes in sound that really don't affect the meaning of a word. And you'll see many examples of this as we go through the video. So phonemes and allophones. In English, p, the unaspirated p, and the aspirated p are allophones of the same phoneme. So here are some examples. Spin, spin, and spin. Spin and spin. Now, these are allophones of the same phoneme because the two p sounds are very similar. They have very similar qualities. However, there is a slight difference, a very subtle difference between the two sounds. And as you see, they do not affect the meaning of the word, so that's why they're allophones. Whether I say spin or spin, you understand what I'm saying with both. They both have the same meaning, which would be spin, as in to twirl. However, in Lao, I'll give you an example in Lao of separate phonemes. Here we have the same sounds, the same phonemes, p and p. Okay, one is unaspirated and the other is aspirated. However, in Lao, these two sounds are separate phonemes. These two sounds can affect word meaning. Here are some examples. You have ba, which means fish, and then you have pa, which means cloth. Okay, so as you see, this subtle sound difference in English does not affect the meaning of the word. However, in Lao, this subtle sound difference is not very subtle, as in these sound differences can change the meaning of the word, one meaning fish and one meaning cloth. Ba and pa. So there you go. There's sort of an intro to how phonemes and allophones work, and also between languages. Here are some just fun phoneme facts. In American English, there's 38 phonemes, where in British English, they have one more phoneme than us, and they have 39. In Khoisan languages, which these languages are found in Africa, they have over 100 phonemes. Okay, so if you sort of compare that with American British English, they have a lot more phonemes than we do. And then there's some languages, such as Piraha in Brazil, which have even fewer phonemes than we do in English. They only have 10. So let's talk more about allophones. Allophones can be used in free variation. So by free variation, I mean dialectal differences. So from one dialect to the next, we may have these subtle sounds and change, however, they do not affect the meaning of the word. Here, I'll give you some examples. You have British English versus American English. You have the ah and the aw. Okay, so for example, you have hot and hot. Okay, so obviously you see this, you can notice this difference in sound. However, it's a subtle difference that really doesn't affect the meaning of the word. Whether I say hot or hot, you still understand what I'm saying. So these would be allophones. Also with allophones, we refer to them as in complementary distribution. So allophones are used in certain instances. Okay, and here we have the voiceless alveolar stop, t, in English. And there are 4 different variations, or 4 different allophones of this phoneme, t. Okay, so these are the subtle differences in sound that may change, depending on how this sound is used in a word. So the voiceless alveolar stop t is realized as a glottal stop when it precedes a syllabic alveolar nasal, such as in the word beaten. You notice that it's not pronounced beaten. However, it changes to beaten, which we use the glottal stop, because it precedes a syllabic alveolar nasal, the n. The t is realized as a voiced alveolar flap, d, when it's in interval calic position, such as in the word butter. Okay, the t here is in between 2 vowels, and then and So when it's in interval calic position, the t, which would normally be butter, changes to butter. And here we use the flap butter, which is similar to the Spanish trill, like as in para. Also, the t is realized as an aspirated voiceless alveolar stop when it's in syllable initial position, such as in the word tap. We know when a sound is aspirated when you feel a stream of air when you pronounce the sound. So one way of doing this, if you put your hand in front of your mouth and you pronounce the word tap, you'll feel a flow of air after the t sound. Tap, tap. And this, you know that you're aspirating that sound. Okay, and here the t is in syllable initial position, so therefore it is aspirated. However, the last one, this t sound is realized as an unaspirated voiceless alveolar stop when it follows a voiceless alveolar fricative. And here's an example. An S is considered a voiceless alveolar fricative, and when the t is following that sound. And here it is unaspirated, still. And if you do that test that I told you, that I mentioned before, if you put your hand in front of your mouth and you say still, you won't feel the flow of air after the t sound. That's how you know it's unaspirated. To sort of give you a fun contrast of the aspirated and unaspirated voiceless alveolar stops, if you say till and still, you'll notice that in the word till, you'll feel a stream of air, which means that that is aspirated because it is in syllable initial position. However, in the word still, you will not feel that stream of air anymore because it is now it's following a voiceless alveolar fricative, thus. So here we have still. So there you go. Those are the here's sort of the allophones of the phoneme t. So the t is realized as these four different allophones depending on its usage within a word or its location within a word. So each of these allophones are used in certain circumstances. Okay. So to sort of review a little bit, we have a butter versus butter. They have the same meaning. So whether I say butter or butter, you know what I mean by that word. It has the same meaning. So that's our test, and we know that they're allophones of the same phoneme. If, however, butter and butter had different meanings, then we would know that the flap here and the aspirated t, we would know that they're separate phonemes if butter and butter had indeed separate meanings. Okay, now here are some steps for establishing phonemes and allophones. So if you're confronted with a new language and you're studying speech data, there are certain steps that you need to take in order to identify different phonemes and allophones in that language. So first you want to start out with suspicious pairs of phones. So any phones that may have phonetic similarity, those would be worthy of studying. So for example, if they were similar in place or manner of articulation, that would signify phonetic similarity. Then we would want to determine the phone. So then we would determine the phones that we want to compare and contrast. Such as, for example, in English, we want to compare and contrast the voiceless or the aspirated voiceless alveolar stop with the aspirated or unaspirated voiceless alveolar stop. They're both alveolar, they're both stops, so they would be worthy of studying since they're so similar. Then we would obtain transcription of speech data. So how are these, we would transcribe speech from native speakers of that language in order to have data so that we could compare and contrast the phones. Next, we would categorize the words from the speech data for each phone that we're contrasting. And then we would check for minimal pairs. If we do find, if we do find minimal pairs, that means that those two sounds that we are studying are separate phonemes. So as soon as we find minimal pairs, then we know they're separate phonemes. Minimal pairs are, for example, in English, mat and pat. Okay, those would be minimal pairs. If we don't find minimal pairs, then we want to check for complementary distribution to see if indeed they are allophones. And we would compare and contrast the occurrence of the phones, so the instances in which those phones are used within those words or our speech data. Is there a pattern? So we want to constantly be looking for patterns. How are these phones used? When are they used? When are they found in the words? What other phones and sounds are surrounding those sounds that we're studying in particular? And then after that, we would determine phonologic rules of realization. So we would come to a conclusion of how these allophones occur within words. Okay, so let's sort of go through this. Here is some speech data of a language called Gunyandi, and I marked their English equivalent. Okay, and I wanna within the speech data we want to find suspicious pairs. So both of them are velar nasals. Okay, so they both have the same place of articulation, which is velar, and the same manner of articulation, which is nasal. Okay, and then we're going to determine the phones. So the phones here is a velar nasal, and here's an advanced velar nasal. Okay, and then here's our speech data with those phones in them. So here we have the advanced velar nasal. Here we have an advanced velar nasal, just a velar nasal, velar nasal, velar nasal, and an advanced velar nasal, advanced velar nasal, velar nasal, a velar nasal, advanced velar nasal, and a velar nasal. Now we want to categorize those same words in that speech data according to their phone. So here's the velar nasal, and here's the advanced velar nasal. And I just made 2 columns and categorized the words per column. So here you'll see velar nasal, velar nasal, velar nasal, velar nasal, velar nasal, velar nasal. Here are the advanced velar nasals. Here, 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 and here. Okay. The next step is minimal pairs. Do we have minimal pairs? Okay, so as I sort of mentioned before, minimal pairs are 2 words that have the same transcription with the exception of one phone. Okay, such as, for example, mat and pat in English, or cat and bat. Okay, those are all minimal pairs because they have the same transcription with the exception of one phone. Here we go. Here's one example. Pat, meaning pat and cat, p and k, are the only phones different between the 2 words. They have 2 different meanings, therefore p and k are separate phonemes. So we want to find minimal pairs. If we do, that means that the velar nasal and the advanced velar nasal are separate phonemes. And there are no minimal pairs. So that means that the velar nasal and the advanced velar nasal probably are not separate phonemes. Therefore, they are allophones of the same phoneme. Well, now we have to find a pattern. Okay, so what are the patterns? So here I bolded the sound that we are the sounds we are investigating, and I also bolded the letters that surround that word. Okay, and here I noticed that there is actually a pattern. Okay, I noticed here that the velar nasal only occurs before phonemes gu, u, a, and a. Okay, so I noticed that that's the pattern here. And if you were to look at the advanced velar nasals, you will not see these same vowel sounds after the advanced velar nasal. You'll find different vowel sounds after the advanced velar nasal. We have the E and the E and the A, and we also have an advanced G with an E. Okay, so and I noticed that both the sounds can occur in initial position, they could occur in final position, they could occur in intervocalic position. So here I studied what sounds surround the sounds that are in study, and then where are these sounds found within the words, and does it make a difference? So I found here that the sounds may be significant to determine the difference between the usage of the velar stop and the advanced velar nasal and the advanced velar nasal. But I also found that the placement of those 2 sounds really don't have any significance. So I created rules of realization based on the speech data and the patterns that I found. So here I said that the velar nasal is realized as an advanced velar nasal when it's in the environment of when it is found before a front closed vowel. Okay. So here, if you avoid, so here you have the front closed vowel. Here are front vowels and closed vowels. So here, the front closed vowels, we have E and A. Okay, those are the front closed vowels. So when the velar nasal, when the advanced velar nasal is in front of a front closed vowel, it becomes advanced. And then also, what about that g? Okay, the g is realized as an advanced g when it is between an advanced velar nasal and a front closed vowel. So those are the two rules of realization that I have come up with based on the speech data and the patterns that I found within that language of the Grignandi. Okay, so I hope you've learned something from this video, and I hope that you have a better understanding of the difference between phonetics and phonology, and I hope also that you have gained some insight on what is a phoneme, what is an allophone, how do you determine a phoneme, how you determine an allophone. So I think those were the goals of this video, and I hope to see you again with my next video. Thanks. Bye-bye.